Tonight on KQED Newsroom, congressional Democrats, including some from California, are demanding the resignation, even impeachment, of Attorney General William Barr. We'll talk with a member of the House Democratic leadership team, East Bay Congresswoman Barbara Lee. Also, the U.S. is dealing with the worst outbreak of measles in decades. We'll get the latest on cases in California and hear from a state lawmaker pushing for a crackdown on exemptions for vaccinations. And KQED's Youth Takeover returns, featuring the voices and perspectives of Bay Area high school students on the issues that matter most to them. Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Scott Schaefer, here for Tui Vu. We begin with growing tensions between House Democrats and Attorney General William Barr. Speaker Nancy Pelosi says Barr broke the law by lying to Congress about the Mueller Report, as House Democrats threatened to hold him in contempt after he skipped a hearing of the Judiciary Committee. Barr also ignored a subpoena deadline to turn over the full Mueller report and evidence. Earlier in the week, there was a much more conciliatory tone as President Trump, along with Democratic leaders Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, announced an agreement to spend $2 trillion for infrastructure upgrades. No details yet on where the money will come from or how it'll be spent. Joining us now to discuss all of this is Oakland Congresswoman Barbara Lee. She sits on the House Appropriations Committee. Congresswoman Lee, thanks for being here.
Very happy to be with you today.
Some fireworks in Washington this week with Attorney General William Barr testifying before the Senate Judiciary Committee. You are now among a growing chorus of Democrats calling on him to resign. Tell me why that is. Why do you think?
Sure, Scott. I called for him to resign a couple of weeks ago. This Attorney General is the Attorney General for the people of the United States, for the Department of Justice. He is acting as Donald Trump's personal attorney.
And what's
so
the
he
difference?
should resign. The difference is he's protecting the president. He is promoting and putting forth lies. He is
Under
not
oath.
telling the truth under oath. Yeah, he should really resign. But also, he is totally in many ways not representing the people of the United States by representing the Department of Justice, which is what it's supposed to be. And he's taken this as a personal kind of representation of the man in the White House.
There
Donald
are
Trump.
also calls for him to be impeached. The head of the Judiciary Committee in your House, the House of Representatives, is looking at possibly holding him in contempt for refusing to come and testify. Are the Democrats spinning their wheels a little bit on this? Because obviously nothing like impeachment or calling, he's not going to resign. I think that's fair to say. Impeachment would never make it through the Senate. So what's the point of pushing that?
Scott, no one is above the law. We're not spinning our wheels. You have to hold the president, you have to hold the attorney general, and whomever accountable. We're elected to uphold the rule of law. And so, no, we're not spinning our wheels. We have, remember, 3 branches of government. We have oversight responsibility, and we've got to move forward and do the work that the Constitution requires us do.
How much dissension, if that's the right word, is there within your caucus? You know, Nancy Pelosi has said that impeachment isn't worth it of President Trump. There are some people clearly calling for impeachment. You know, what are those conversations like? How heated are they?
I don't think it's really dissension. I think we have different points of views. And of course, Speaker Pelosi understands that we have got to win in 2020. And so she's been very strategic and she knows what she's doing. There are many of us who agree with her that these investigations must go forward. And we have to hold this president accountable. I, for one, believe that impeachment must be on the table. And so we have members of our own Democratic caucus talking about different ways to approach this, but I don't consider it dissension, and we have different points of views, and Speaker Pelosi is really, and our committee chairs are moving forward. You
mentioned 2020. Of course, you've endorsed Kamala Harris for president. Joe Biden doing well in the polls. Bernie Sanders, not too bad either. There seems to be 2 schools of thought in the party. One is, let's go with someone safe who can win back working class voters, somebody like Joe Biden. And then there are others who are saying, no, that's the last thing. We need to have a candidate who can bring out women and people of color who sat home in 2016. What do you think? Is one of those correct from your perspective?
Well, I don't think it's either or. I mean, I, of course, have endorsed Senator Kamala Harris, and she is a very effective leader. I think that she is demonstrating the fact that she can pull together a coalition of women, of people of color, and yes, the white working class, because she cares about jobs. She cares about jobs going offshore and bringing back manufacturing jobs. And come on, you know, it's been people of color who have not had the good paying jobs. And so we can relate to, and she wants to make sure that this is an inclusive society and everyone benefits from economic growth, not just one part of our country or one constituency.
There is a lot of concern in the intelligence community about Russian interference in the 2020 election. President Trump had a conversation with Putin today, and this issue, he said, did not come up. In fact, the president afterwards called it a witch hunt, yet again, the Russia investigation, a hoax. Do you think what kind of signal does that give to those who are trying, in fact, to interfere with our elections?
It's a very bad signal. It's terrible because we know that Russia has interfered in our elections. We know that in many ways they determine the outcome of the elections, and we know that they're planning to interfere once again in 2020. And this president should really acknowledge that. We need the protections in terms of our democracy. We're at a very fragile point in our country and throughout the world, quite frankly. They're interfering all over the globe.
Let's talk about appropriations. There was the House Appropriations Committee released a draft on Monday of its funding priorities for the next fiscal year. And then there was a big meeting at the White House with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, and they seem to have come to some kind of general agreement of around a $2 trillion infrastructure bill. A, do you think that is actually going to happen? And B, what would your priorities be for the Bay Area in a bill like that?
Sure, and I have to be optimistic that it will happen. I think the devil, of course, is going to be in the details, and it's going to be how do we pay for it. But $2 trillion, I think, is good in terms of a number to start with. In the Bay Area, we have huge infrastructure needs, not to mention our freeways, our bridges, our roads, but we have also broadband that's necessary, and that's an infrastructure issue in our rural communities in the Central Valley. We have other issues in terms of housing. We're trying to make sure that we include affordable housing. We have a tremendous housing crisis.
So you would see that as potentially part of infrastructure?
Absolutely. We're fighting to get housing as part of the infrastructure bill. It's extremely necessary. So I view this new infrastructure initiative in the broadest sense, because infrastructure can not only be seen as brick and mortar, but it has to be seen as really enhancing our economic growth and creating jobs and making sure that there's housing and other kinds of infrastructure needs met for everyone.
Excuse me, I want to ask you about some of these town hall meetings you've been holding with Mark DeSaulnier, your colleague from the East Bay, around race. What is the goal of these town hall meetings?
Sure, and let me just say, this is the 400th anniversary of the first slave arriving in America from Africa, 400 years. Yeah. So we're remembering and commemorating the legacy of this horrific crime against humanity, slavery. And so what I have done for many years now is trying to get the country to open up a conversation about race and racism and look at where we've come, but how we still have to correct the damage that needs to be repaired. Now, this is as relates to the African American community. And so we're conducting town meetings. I've had 4 around the Bay Area, but also we want to take this on the road because our colleagues want to know, how do you talk about race? What does it mean? When you talk about systemic institutional racism, structural racism, oftentimes people don't even recognize the decisions that they're making, and the behavior they're engaged in is negatively impacting African Americans and people of color.
It's a big topic for sure.
It is, but we've got to deal with it. I have a bill I'm going to introduce later this year calling for a truth and reconciliation and healing process and transformational process similar to South Africa and Rwanda.
All right, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
There have been more than 700 cases of measles so far this year, with cases reported in nearly 24 states, including California. This week, officials at UCLA and Cal State Los Angeles lifted a quarantine on nearly 800 students and staff members who had possibly been exposed. 40 people in California have been infected with measles so far this year, and most of them were not vaccinated against the highly contagious illness. Last week, a bill by State Senator Richard Pan targeting doctors who write fraudulent medical exemptions for childhood vaccinations cleared its first legislative hurdle in Sacramento. I'm joined now by KQED health correspondent April Dembosky. And the author of SB 276, California State Senator and pediatrician Richard Pan. He joins us via Skype from Sacramento. Welcome to both of you. Let me begin with you, April. Give us the latest. What are the numbers right now? What's happening in terms of the public health response in California?
So as you said, there are 40 confirmed cases, and there's not a statewide outbreak, but there are pockets of outbreaks. Currently 3 right now. Butte County, Sacramento, and Los Angeles. The most recent cases were from Los Angeles and Orange County. And you mentioned the quarantine, and this just, whenever somebody may have come into contact with either a person who has measles or who went through the same space that somebody with measles had been, it just triggers an incredible effort of investigations to try to track down where those people went, who the people are who may have been exposed, and then find out their vaccination status.
And as I said, there were many students and staff members who had been quarantined in Los Angeles at UCLA and Cal State Los Angeles. What did they have to do to get out of the quarantine? What did they have to prove that they'd been vaccinated?
Right, exactly. So they have to either prove that they've had 2 doses of the measles vaccine, which is 97% effective, or prove that they've had measles in the past, which then makes you immune. If they couldn't do either of those things, then they had to stay home for the remainder of the quarantine.
And Dr. Pan, do we know how these measles cases that we just heard about in Los Angeles and elsewhere in the state, how did they spread?
Well, most of them were actually brought by people who are unvaccinated. They went overseas to travel, and then they came back and brought back the disease. And the real challenge is that many people who are unvaccinated tend to hang out with other people who are unvaccinated. And especially if they attend a school that has a low vaccination rate, that's when an outbreak could pick up steam.
And some of those same requirements for K through 12 schools where you have to prove that you've been vaccinated, that doesn't exist when you get into at the college level?
True. So actually, UC implemented immunization requirements just last year, so only the freshman class had to follow those. And actually, CSU announced new immunization requirements just this fall in March.
Now, your bill, as I mentioned, that would give kind of a booster shot to an earlier piece of legislation you had, which is now law, basically cracking down on these fraudulent exemptions. Talk about that. It cleared the Health Committee. Where does it stand?
So this bill really is trying to limit the number of pockets of schools that have very low vaccination rates. So with 277, we have actually raised the overall vaccination rate in the state, and that's great. And some people have even credited that law with the fact that we don't have a statewide outbreak right now, despite the fact we have many cases of measles that have been brought to the state of California. However, the problem is that we have numerous schools that have low vaccination rates because there are very high percentage of their students with medical exemptions, many of them fairly suspect medical exemptions. And what we also see is that there are doctors advertising for medical exemptions. So for example, in San Diego Unified School District, an investigation of the medical exemptions granted in that school district showed that one physician who actually advertised medical exemptions wrote almost a third of those medical exemptions.
And so your bill would give more oversight over this process to the state health department.
Correct. And this is following a model of West Virginia, another state that has very successfully done this. We need to be sure that all children are protected at school, that schools are safe, because there are children who really do need those medical exemptions, and they're counting on their classmates to be vaccinated so that they don't get sick.
And what are you hearing either at your hearing in committee or just elsewhere as you talk about this bill? What are you hearing from parents?
What I'm hearing from parents is that please keep our kids safe. We appreciate what you did with SB 277, and we need to go after those bad doctors who are basically making money by throwing the rest of us, our children, under the bus, by putting our children at risk. So we shouldn't allow physicians to be monetizing their license by writing these fake medical exemptions.
What about parents who, of course, are opposed to vaccinations or want to have their, the right to say no? What are you, is it a small group of people? Is it growing, or is it are they just sort of persistent and loud?
Well, they're a small number that's persistent, but unfortunately, when they cluster together in individual schools, those schools are at risk, and that becomes the tinder for a wildfire outbreak of disease. And so in order to protect the public and to protect students at school, we need this bill. And in fact, this bill is actually sponsored by the Medical Association, the California Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics. Doctors know we need this bill to keep our patients safe.
April, what do you hear from listeners, particularly those opposed to vaccinations, when you report on a story like this? I mean, do you get a lot of response? Is there a lot of, people sort of paying attention who are opposed to the bill and also to, mandatory vaccinations?
Yeah, I mean, I think as Dr. Pan said, overall, the number of parents who are opposed to vaccine is small, but they are very vocal. And so at that hearing last week, for about 2.5 hours, you had parents lined up lodging their opposition to the bill. Were
there parents on the other side also?
There were parents on the other side as well, but I think they were outnumbered, at least at this particular
They don't mobilize
hearing.
in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, there were buses parked outside the Capitol, people lined up in the hallways, kind of waiting. But from parents that I hear from, it's not just people who are totally opposed to vaccination, but also you have parents who are what you call vaccine hesitant. So, they're just overwhelmed by the number of vaccines and shots that their kids are getting. And so maybe they look at delaying some of them, or maybe taking some but not all.
And the Department of Health in Marin sent out a letter this week to parents. Why did they feel it was necessary to do that? There hasn't been this kind of outbreak of measles this time around, right, in Marin?
In Marin, that's right. But as Dr. Pan was saying, there are some schools and pockets of the state where the vaccination rate is very low. And Marin has a few of those schools. And measles is highly contagious. So if a person who's sick walks into a room of 20 people and they're unvaccinated, 18 of them will get sick. There's a 90% rate. And so the health department in Marin wants to prevent, an outbreak at these schools, and is basically warning parents, if your child is unvaccinated, they could be asked to stay home for 21 days, which could be a big disruption to the school year.
And Dr. Pan, I'm wondering, we have more than 2 million or so undocumented immigrants in California. Do you have any particular concerns about their access to health care and to vaccinations, especially in light of the relatively harsh rhetoric we're hearing out of Washington right now around illegal immigration?
Interesting enough, most of those immigrants come from countries with much higher vaccination rates. So they're vaccinated. They're not bringing disease to our shores. It's actually unvaccinated Americans who are traveling to places where there are measles outbreaks and other outbreaks and bringing that disease back to our country. So that's the problem. We've heard about cases where people travel and they go get the disease, they come back, and then they spread it amongst other people who are unvaccinated. And we need to be sure we get ahead of this. This is why vaccination is so important. I would also mention, by the way, that parents still choose whether their children get vaccinated or not. There is no forced vaccination. You go to the doctor talks to you about vaccination, you decide, does your child get vaccinated or not?
Yeah.
What we try to do is we try to protect the public by being sure our schools are safe and requiring vaccinations to enter school.
April, we're short on time, but what's the big picture here, the longer term stakes in getting this right?
Well, I think, as we said before, measles is very contagious. 20 years ago, measles was essentially eradicated from the United States. And so that's what we want to make sure. And I think what's interesting about what we see in these national cases in New York, there's just been this massive spread. But in California, we've actually contained it quite well. That's why our cases number is so low.
And that's, of course, what we'd like to continue. Thank you very much, health correspondent April Dembosky and State Senator and pediatrician Richard Pan in Sacramento. Thank you, too.
Thank you.
Khalid Safi and Jose de Jesus Ochoa attend Ignacio Valley High School in Concord. The two freshmen are worried about climate change. So they began looking into their school's recycling effort to minimize the waste that ends up in landfills. They found that items easy to recycle, such as paper and aluminum cans, were ending up in the trash. And even finding bins to throw out recyclables can be a challenge for students on campus. But they're hoping to change that by asking school officials and classmates to step up in the fight against climate change, one recycled bottle at a time. Joining me now are Khalid Safi and Jose de Jesus Ochoa from Ignacio Valley High School, and Rohith Mulakat, a senior at Northgate High School in Walnut Creek. Guys, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Let me begin with you, Jose. Tell us a little bit about why you decided to focus on recycling.
Well, it was definitely when I first found out that most of my classrooms didn't have bins at all. That really shocked me because that should be anything that is always in schools. If you walk around any classrooms, you can't really find any recycle bins.
When you went to school officials, I assume at some point, right? You, like, who did you go to? Your teacher, the principal?
Well, our teacher was first to present us like with their more issues in this topic. So then we got led up to our janitor administrator and our principals. We tried to contact our district, but they were called back. So
I mean, it's a pretty big deal for freshmen to be calling up the district. I mean, did anybody encourage you to do that, or you just decided, hey, let's go to the top?
yeah, the top is like where we thought we would get the most information. So
Yeah.
that was definitely where we wanted to go.
Yeah. And Khaled, did it seem like you were being taken seriously, or were, they just kind of listening, kind of going through the motions? What do you think?
Well, they were just kind of listening because when we called them, they really didn't pick up. So, yeah, they were just listening.
And what about your classmates? I mean, did you talk to them, and were there other people besides you guys took the lead, but were there other, people in your class who were noticing the same thing?
Well, yeah, some people did notice the same thing. I interviewed one student, and she said how she felt upset about how the school isn't recycling and how it could harm the earth. So.
And so, where are things now? I mean, what have you been doing to change it?
We've been talking to the janitors and their efforts to recycle, and to the principal on what they could do to bring a new program for recycling bins throughout the quads and classrooms.
And Jose, have you been seeing any changes, or is mostly talking at this point?
It's mostly talking at this point, just getting information and finding out where the school's at. And we're like hoping to get things done. Our principal, Aoife Huckabee, told us that he originally had talked to a company, and they never got back to him.
Yeah. And Rohit, let's bring you in. Your high school, Northgate in Walnut Creek, had a history of recycling, but maybe not doing it so well.
Yeah, so last year I founded the environmental club at our school, and we found out that our school, even though we had blue recycling bins in every classroom, was not recycling anymore, because former environmental clubs who had with all their members graduated, they were taking out the recycling themselves. And so once they graduated, no one was taking care of it, and they had tried to work with the administration to try to set up a system in place so that they could recycle it when they were gone. But due to complications with the administration, it didn't work out.
Were there different colored bins, or is it like, how is it being sorted?
So it was, we have trash cans. We used to have trash cans all around the school. We had little blue bins for like paper and classrooms, right? But so as part of the environmental club, I tried to talk to the principal, but our school, I love my school, but they were really busy at the time. And they were not
busy with what?
At the time, we had our school shooting walkout, and so that was a big priority for the school, and so that's obviously understandable, right? But it seems like he was listening to me, not ready to implement a recycling program at the time.
Yeah.
So the club started an online petition, and then we put that on the neighborhood website to rally some.
Like Nextdoor?
Yeah, Nextdoor. That was exactly the website.
Yeah.
So from there, we were able to get a bunch of community support. And then through that support, we were able to meet with the Mount Diablo Unified School District facility manager, the recycling center for Walnut Creek, and Republic Services for our area.
So listening to Khaled and Jose talk about they're trying to get their school to take this seriously, what advice would you have for them based on what happened with you?
Yeah, don't give up after they say that we're doing other things. Like, this is obviously something that's very important, and so you got to keep on going at it, fight for it. That's all I have to say. Yeah.
So did you get no for an answer a few times? You had to keep pushing?
Yeah, initially it was just like they didn't really take us seriously.
Yeah.
But once we met with the district and the recycling center, they're all for it. We were able to persuade them to get a 3-bin system where we have now trash, recycling, and compost all around the school.
And you're graduating, so you're going to be gone. Is somebody going to pick up, the torch from you?
Yeah, so luckily in implementing this is not something the students do, right? This is the custodians take out it themselves. So even if my club completely disappears, it's going to be still done year after year. But we do have some really cool juniors and sophomores who are going to be leading the club next year. And the students really and the faculty all love it, so it's going to be part of our school for a while.
I'm wondering if you guys, Jose, Khaled, do you feel like because you're freshmen, I mean, he's a senior, so he's maybe got a little more, cred with the school, maybe? I don't know. Or they take you more seriously? I mean, do you feel like, you know, are the people above you and like juniors and seniors, I mean, are they into what you're doing as well? I mean, do you get feedback from them?
Well, we haven't really like gotten much information from them, but we definitely, like, out of the students we've interviewed, they're definitely like on top of this topic, like, oh yes, we want to change the school.
How about you, Khalid? Have you been hearing? What are your family saying?
Yeah, my family definitely thinks that we should recycle, since it does have a negative effect if we don't recycle.
Do you guys feel like, you know, it's kind of up to your generation going down the road here, that you're going to be left with a lot of environmental problems by people my age and older? I mean, do you feel like this is like your problem to solve in a way?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to be living through this. It's going to be affecting businesses, economics. This is going to be a whole branch of the future that we're going to have to face. So we got to start working now.
And you are graduating and you're going to Cal, I think, in the fall. So has all of this, you know, affected the kind of studies you want to pursue?
Yeah, I'm actually majoring in environmental science, and I hope to work on environmental policy as like when I grow up or
when you
get older.
How about you guys? Do you think, like, is this something that is more of a kind of a side thing, or can you imagine, like, as you get older and graduate, you know, working in an environmental field?
I definitely see myself like doing that, because like we're definitely in an era where like we definitely need to get this done. So yeah.
So let me ask you guys, you've been working on this for a few months. What's your takeaway? What do you feel like you've learned from it, Jose?
Definitely the impact it has on the world, and like how easily this can be changed. So we're hoping this can like lead to a greater chain reaction of like helping the world.
So you feel like it kind of makes you feel like empowered in a way?
Yes.
Yeah, Khalid, what about you?
I learned that, just like Jose said, it's easy to change the harm that Earth could potentially be going through. And also I learned that we also have a voice.
And you can use it as well. All right, thank you guys, Rohith, Khalid, Jose. Thank you for being here, and thank you for the great work you're doing.
Of course.
That'll do it for us. As always, you can find more of our coverage at kqed.org/newsroom. I'm Scott Schaefer. Thanks for joining us.